And we're recording. Cool. Welcome back to the Moment Makers podcast. Fudge that one up. We've got a special episode today. Eli is not with us. He had some stuff going on at home. Not anything too crazy. Just had some stuff going on this morning. So I've got my wife helping me interview Hannah Brown. She's got some extensive knowledge in the field of mental health and does a lot of really cool stuff. And I'll let her kind of go into more about what that is and what she does here in a second. I want to plug the website, sperocloth.com. Use podcast 10 to save 10% on your entire purchase. And leave us a 5-star review on the comments and 5-star review on the iTunes podcast page. Helps us grow the podcast. So we'll get right into it. Hannah, how are you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Very nice to meet you. So go into a little bit about your experience and kind of what you do.
Sure. So I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Texas. So I've been doing that for the past 3 years. So growing up, what kind of got me into the field of counseling is my older brother had a drug addiction when I was in high school. And so that was my first experience with counseling and therapy and all of that great stuff. And then that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I went to college for psychology, and then you can't do a whole lot with a bachelor's degree in psychology. So I was like, I guess I got to go get my master's or something. So that's what I did. And then I've been a mental health counselor for the last 3 years. And then I also do coaching on the side for young adults that want to kind of get their life together, because there's a lot of, like, you just kind of base your whole life around going to school. And then once you're done with school, your life's supposed to be great. But a lot of people don't know how to make that transition from school to like living their best life. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm doing in my coaching. And then with counseling, I mainly help young adults that are dealing with like anxiety, depression, college transition stuff, life transition stuff, relationships, all of that good stuff, self-esteem, self-worth, all of that.
That's really cool. So all of that really fits with the Spero branding. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that's all of those things are kind of what I founded the brand on, was suicide, depression, anxiety, mental health, addictions, all of that stuff. So it's excuse me, it's really cool to see other people having that kind of mindset and taking steps to actually get certified and professional fields and all that stuff. So you said that you kind of went through the therapy and all that stuff with your brother?
Yeah, so when he went to like a treatment program, and they had like a whole family week thing where it was a bunch of families that came in, and they did like a mix of family therapy and like kind of larger, I guess, more group therapy. And so up until then, like, my family was the quote unquote perfect family. There really is no perfect family. So that was, and we kind of grew up in like a smaller town. And so it was kind of a big deal. And my parents were very, I would say, more like ashamed of what was going on.
Yeah.
And so that was difficult for me to kind of see and deal with. And then I was like, I think I want to help other like siblings of people that are going through that, or other family members. So that's what originally got me into wanting to do like counseling or something in the mental health field. And then as I've kind of transitioned along, that's not really necessarily my niche or what I want to focus on anymore. But that's what originally got me into it. It was kind of my own experiences with therapy and seeing the benefits of that and wanting to help other people experience that same thing.
Is it ever difficult to, so like, for example, my sister works in a psych ward, and I always ask her, like, is it difficult to see, people going through these situations? Is it hard to like separate yourself and not take it home with you? Like when you see people who are just really struggling, because I feel like I took psychology, I've taken like 3 classes, and just the thought of working in that field is really difficult for me because I'm like the type of person who can't separate themselves from that. Mm-hmm. Like I take all that baggage with me.
I think at first, yes. And I think that's part of just like through experience and going through school and everything, you kind of learn to start to build up those boundaries and to have
Right.
more of like that separation. Because there were definitely periods where I was burnt out and taking work home with me and not having like a good work life balance. And so I think that is because I mean, my job during the week is I'm sitting in front of like at least 20 different clients a week telling me different stories. And not all of those are going to be really traumatic stuff. It can just be, here's what I'm anxious about today or this week, or here's the good things that are going on in my life this week. But you really have to have like a good, this is work, and because I don't want to come home and not be able to be there for the people that are important in my life because I've
Right.
already given all my energy to everyone else, to my clients. So I think over time you just kind of learn that these are like my clients' lives and I can be with them for that hour or however long the
Mm-hmm.
session is, and then it's time to like move, like kind of compartmentalize that a little bit and then move on to the next thing.
I think one thing that you mentioned that was really kind of important to talk about, and kind of the reason that we've started this outlet. You mentioned that your parents were more or less a little bit ashamed of the process of everything, and kind of removing that perfect family um, persona, if you will. Um, and I think that's the case for most people. Um, I think that's why people don't seek treatment or seek professional help, is because they don't want to be labeled as um, less than, or have their family perceived as being some people that can't deal with stuff. And sorry if there's noise, my daughter's playing on the ground. um, but I think that's a really important thing to talk about um, is that it's not something to be ashamed of. Most people struggle with some form of mental health issues. It may not be on the level of addiction, it may not be on the level of cutting or suicide, but everybody struggles with some level of something. So I don't know. Do you have anything that you can kind of elaborate on with that?
Yeah, I think counseling, or just any, not that everyone needs a counselor because I don't think not everyone's like I want to go to counseling, but any sort of
Yeah.
like self-help books, or like if spirituality is your thing
Yeah.
or personal development, whatever it is for you, I think that's so important. I think everyone can benefit from that because I think there's this misconception that I have to go to counseling once something is bad,
Hmm.
and that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Like realistically, you would want to start going before things get really bad.
Yeah.
But I think as like what I've seen with the younger generations is that it is becoming more normalized. There's still a lot of stigma, but it's like I could talk about going to see my therapist and then my other friends talking about her going to see her therapist. So it's more like it's more of a normal thing, I think, as the younger generations are getting older. But I definitely still see that with the older generations. And
Yeah.
a lot of my clients are talking about how they'll talk about like their depression or anxiety with their parents or, older family members, and they just don't get it. And so they
Yeah.
don't feel necessarily like understood. And there is still a lot of people that think it's like, just get over it or
Yeah.
just do this thing and it will be better. And that's not necessarily the case for everyone.
I took therapy for a while after I had my first daughter. I was going through, custody and everything. It was a situation, but at one point he was like, "I think you're ready to, like graduate, I guess, from therapy. I don't think you need any more sessions and everything." And it kind of left me feeling like, because it was really helpful, and it kind of, it's like to disassociate from like, it's one thing to talk to somebody like a professional about it and not just like family.
Yeah.
So when he was like, "You're ready to move on," I kind of had that moment of like panic. And I guess like hindsight, yeah, I was ready because I pretty much said everything I needed to say. But
Mm-hmm.
how do you deal with like knowing when somebody's ready, like when you feel like they're stable enough, like you've given them the tools to move on, and you know what I mean? Like how can
Yeah.
you really tell when you're like, okay, you're stable, I think you're ready?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times I will, like, first of all, when we first start, I like to set out, like, what are your goals? What are you hoping to get out of coming here? Whether it's, I
Right.
want to feel less anxious, or I want to figure out how to have a healthy relationship. I want to work things out with my partner, whatever that is. And then, I'll kind of always like touch back into those goals throughout our session. So like, hey, let's check back in. How do we feel like we're doing on our goals? Are you feeling like you're managing your anxiety more? Do we still need to work on that? And so I kind of wait for them to realize that they've made progress, because I think a lot of what's good in therapy is not me telling them what to do, because then they don't really want to do it, but them coming to the realization of what it is that they need and just providing that space for them to figure that out. And so a lot of times they will be like, I think I'm good. Like, I think I don't need to keep coming, or let's move it down to like every other week, or they'll still come in like once a month. So I always try to give them that option, because I never want to be like, I think you're fine. Like, see you later, if they are not wanting to end that relationship right then. And maybe they still need that level of support or some level of that support.
Well, and I think self-awareness is important with anything in that kind of mental state too. So not only knowing kind of where you are that you need therapy, but also knowing kind of where you are in your process. And like a big thing that we talk about is self-care. And whatever that is, doing that one or two things that helps you kind of clear your mental state to be in a better position to know kind of where you're at and where you need to be. So I think that's a really cool and important thing to talk about too.
Well, I think I could have benefited from that, not just hearing, oh, you're done, you're ready to go. Like, just kind of coming to that realization, like, that would have been helpful.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't get a lot out of it, which I did, but it's a little harder when you're kind of pushed out of the nest. Like, it's a transition.
I wouldn't have done, I mean, every therapist has their own style, so I don't be like, that was wrong, but like, that's not what I would have done.
Right.
I would definitely, like, if I'm going to end things with a client and they're like, I think I'm ready, then like, I want to give them like a few sessions to kind of process through everything that we talked about and where they're going and how to like set up a plan for them so that they're not falling back into what got them into counseling in the first place.
Yeah. Right. And that's a big thing with addiction. Because I have family that suffered from it, and we've since lost them because of it. But that's a big thing too, is not only having the counseling through the issues, but finding the root of the issue and knowing what triggers there are that cause you to get to that place in the first place. Because people can go years without having an issue, and then they fall back into the same patterns that they did, and they repeat the cycle all over again.
Well, what would you recommend for that? Like, if somebody, like, let's say they have counseling, they get to a really good place, and then years later it comes back and they're just overwhelmed. Would you recommend, like, starting counseling again, or?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's helpful to then, okay, I realize that now I have another issue that's coming up, or a lot of times people, when they come and see me, for example, I ask them if they've been to counselors before and all of that, and usually they have. Most people have. And that's been because they were, like, whether they were a teenager and their parents made them go, or they were working through stress in college and now they're in like their professional life and it's coming back up again and they don't know how to deal with it. So I think it's not necessarily that once I go to therapy and then I'm done that with those sessions with that counselor that I'm going to be like healed. Yeah. I think a lot of times people don't take the consistent and small actions every day that are going to add up to working on those things. So like, if you're with your therapist, you work on how do I manage my anxiety, and you get all these tools, then you stop using them. Well, like your anxiety is going to come back. Yeah. It's always going to be there, but it's going to be now unmanageable. So I think that's where a lot of people fall off, is that they don't do the consistent actions that they need, which I think is the great part about counseling, or just having that other person that's going to hold you accountable. Like, I know I have to go see my therapist this week and she's going to ask me about whether or not I did these things, or I know I have this outlet this week that I can talk to this person about something that's bothering me. And then if I stop going, I don't have that accountability, or I don't have that support. And so the problems are just going to stack up again. Yeah.
And it's like you said, like, you can manage the anxiety, but it's not really ever going to go away. Yeah. Even if you get like really good at identifying, this is what sets my anxiety off, and you separate yourself from those things, like, you can't ever completely, do that. Like, you're always going to have it. So it's important. Like, for me, he gave me the tools, like, even though he kind of set me loose, what I did get was like the tools on how to deal with it when I am on my own. And I think that's so important, because like, that's one thing I didn't get from, like, talking to family and everything. You feel good in that moment because you get it off your chest, but you don't learn how to handle it moving forward.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're good for that day, that moment. You might even be good for a week, but then, like, you're by yourself, the thoughts come back, and you don't know, this is how I need to stop this thought, or this is what I need to do, to feel better. And I think that's why counseling is so important, and I hate that it took me so long to kind of swallow my pride and realize there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I hate that stigma. Like, to me, now that I've done it, it doesn't even make sense. Like, why would that be a problem?
Right. Why is it this horrible thing?
Right.
Well, that's something that we've talked about in previous episodes, and I don't know if you've listened to any of them, but that's something that we kind of like to reiterate, is that it's not something that's ever going to go completely away. It's something that you're going to learn how to manage your mental health and recognize your triggers. That's why I think having an outlet that not even just a therapist, that's good for a lot of people, but it's not good for all people.
Yeah.
Really just getting the approval that you're allowed to feel the way you're feeling, just by society, because society doesn't have a real conversation on this topic. And that's why we've started this podcast, is to help start that conversation, to give people permission to feel the way they're feeling, and to help show them that there are tools in place that you can use, whatever works for you, to manage it. That it's really, it may not go away. It may not ever go away, but it's something that you can deal with. It's something that everyone deals with, that it doesn't make you any less of a person. And I think just knowing and having permission to feel the way you're feeling is a lot for a lot of people, because everyone's told that if you feel this way, then you're, if a man feels like they're emotional or they cry, you're not a man, and I think that's very harming for a lot of people. And same for women. If they don't do a certain thing or act a certain way, then you're not a woman. You're not a real woman. And just having permission to feel the way you're feeling is enough to help people kind of start that snowball into managing their anxiety or their depression or whatever their mental health state is, and kind of moving forward into overcoming that, not necessarily getting rid of it, but overcoming it in that sense.
I think you have to see that, like, you're more than your whatever your mental health diagnoses are, or whatever you're currently struggling with, because I think a lot of times people feel that their depression or anxiety runs their life. And it's really the other way around. Like, you are in control of being able to manage it. You just have to make that decision and choose to find the steps to do it, because there's tons of resources out there, not necessarily like access to mental health resources, but there's tons of blogs and, websites and stuff where you can find skills and coping skills and stuff like that. So there is, resources and things for people. And I think you just have to make the decision that I'm going to choose to not let this situation or this diagnosis control my life anymore. And I'm going to learn how to manage it.
Yeah.
My question is, like, since you're a professional, and I'm sure you know, like, way more about this, but so everyone, struggles with it to a degree, but let's say you have a friend or a family member who's, like, really struggling with, like, anxiety or depression, and obviously I'm not a professional, so I can help, to the extent that I can, but how would you go about, like pushing them in the right direction without being too much, like, maybe, because I don't want to go up to someone and be like, you need a counselor, or you need, because I feel like that would do more harm or push them further away. But being, like, encouraging them to take the right steps. But obviously they have to make the decision on their own or it won't stick. But, like, how would you even go about that without causing more harm than good?
I think what people miss, I think a lot of times, is that we feel like we have to give everyone, when someone's, like, opening up to you about their problem, like a friend or family member, is that we feel like we have to provide the solution for them. And what I like listening to a lot of my clients is that they really just want people to listen to them. They don't necessarily always want, well, this is what you actually should do, or this is what you, but I do think that there's some extent where maybe you're that friend that the person is always not dumping on, but it's, you can only handle so much, right? Until you hit, like, a breaking point. So I think you can assess whether or not it's becoming too stressful and too much to manage. And then I think it's helping the person figure out if they want to find a solution to their problems, or sometimes people just want to stay stuck, I think, too, and they don't want to find a solution. They just want to vent about things. Right. But I think offering them, like, have you thought about maybe seeing a counselor, or, what are your hesitancies about seeing a counselor if that is the case, and kind of walking them through that. Or if you've been to a counselor, like maybe sharing some of the kind of like myths or misconceptions that they may have about it. But I think overall, just being that space for someone and just listening, you don't have to have the answers, and you don't have to know the right thing to say, because there really isn't the right thing to say at the time.
And I always feel guilty when somebody comes to me with a problem and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't solve this. And then I feel bad because I'm like, I'm sending you away with no solution. And I almost feel responsible for that, because I'm like, if something happens, that's on me because I couldn't help them. Which I think is, in my own way, something I really struggle with. Because people think that it's only like, oh, this bad thing's happening to me, or this thing gives me anxiety. But for me, a lot of it is, I look at the world and I really am like the kind of person who carries that weight on my shoulders. And I feel like you probably experience that a lot, being in the profession. Like, you have a burden for people, and that's why you're doing what you do, because you want to help them.
Right.
And it's so hard. Like, that goes back to, something you learn over time, you kind of learn in school, is how to disassociate from it, which I have so much respect for you and other counselors who can do that. It's not an easy thing, I feel like, to get to that point.
I think you also learn over time, like, how much impact you do have on people in just the little moments. Or this, like, sometimes clients will come to session, they'll be like, this one thing you said last week stuck out to me, and I have no recollection, like, what I even said. That wasn't something that I thought was super powerful. So it's like, you really have to hold on to those little moments where clients will thank you for something, or send you a note, or just give you a nice compliment. And those things have to kind of keep you going through all of, like, the more difficult days or the darker moments. But I think every single person can impact other people in a positive way. It's just how you're choosing to, like, approach people. And sometimes we don't think that whatever we're saying or doing is really being helpful, but that to someone else could mean the world.
Right.
Now, I kind of want to change gears a little bit here, because I thought of a question that I wanted to ask you about as we were talking. And it's not something that I planned on asking, but as far as kind of the running joke with millennials and how they all want to die, and that kind of meme that's going on, I was curious to know your opinion on that, and how you felt that was being portrayed, and if it was a good thing or a bad thing to.
Well, I don't think it's good.
Well, I know it's not good, but if nothing else, it's some part of a conversation that's being started. So you can see the good and bad in all things. But I was curious to know your opinion on it.
Yeah, I think with social media, it's been like a good and bad thing for mental health.
Yeah.
I think it's made access and conversations about mental health much more prevalent. But then I also think that it kind of gets into, like, this trend phase where, oh, my friend posted on her Snapchat that she's going to kill herself, so now I want to too. So I think sometimes, or it's like, I'm talking about something and now everyone else thinks that they have this, like with sexuality, like someone identifies this way, and now everyone else, all the teenagers, are identifying this way. So I think part of it is, like, people want to be cool and fit in. Yeah. So sometimes that gets taken over in the mental health realm, where it's like, I'm depressed and now everyone else wants to be depressed because it seems cool, or that sort of thing. But I do think that when people are feeling suicidal or things are going on like that, it's really that they want to, it's not necessarily that they always want to die in a way. It's that they want to escape whatever pain they're going through, and they can't imagine that things can get better. So I think a lot of people want to use humor as a way to cope with their problems, and like post funny memes on Facebook. And that's, like, obviously I love humor, so don't not like make funny jokes about things, but there is some extent, like, if this is a real serious issue with you going on underneath posting this meme, then you need to do something else about it besides just posting that stuff. And so I think we have this tendency now to just, like, laugh off things instead of actually facing the reality of the problem.
It's also become kind of romanticized. Like, being sad is that's just what you do. Everyone's sad now. Everyone's depressed. And, like, I know everyone probably is. Like, everyone has their own things that stress them out, that get them down. And for some people, that's really extreme. And for some people, like, I've learned to deal with it on a daily basis. It's just kind of part of life. But one thing that just always has really bothered me is when people think it's, like, just the thing to do. Like, when... For some people, maybe it is, but to other people, it's like, it's a matter of life and death. And
that's the reality, and it's not,
exactly.
I'm going to be this way today because I want to.
Right.
Well, and I think that goes back into the lack of teaching that we have on the subject, the lack of knowledge that we have as just normal everyday people. It's not something that's talked about in school. It's not something that's talked about at home.
Mm-hmm.
So people see something and they latch on to something and they're like, oh, well, that's funny. I kind of feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And us as people that want to help other people, we don't know if they're actually feeling that way, if it's just a meme that they're posting, or if they're joking, or if it's, kind of serious or kind of a joke, or it all stems back to that lack of understanding of what it is that people are actually dealing with on a daily basis. And I think that if we had more teachings and knowledge and outlets for people to really understand the way they're feeling, we'd see a lot less humor involved with it in the sense of that specific type of meme. So the funding that we have in the mental health field and just helping people feel better is terrible. They put a lot more funding into things that don't need to be funded than they do in the actual American people's lives. So,
yeah, I think the problem is that as a parent, you're just doing the best job you can. And so if you don't know how to regulate your emotions, or you don't know how to open up, or you don't know how to have those conversations, then you're not going to be able to have those with your kids. And so a lot of the whole emotional skills and all of that emotional intelligence, that's really not taught in school. Like you said, that's learned at home. And so if I don't know how to do those things and I'm not having those conversations with my kids, then they're not learning that anywhere. And so that's a lot of my young adult clients come in and they have their parents never talked to them about things, or they never felt comfortable to open up about things. And so they're just now learning how to identify how they feel at 30 years old.
Yeah.
So I think if we had that access in schools, where we're having some sort of emotional regulation training throughout our schooling, or a whole class on mental health, and just having, I don't know, some sort of access for parents to help learn how they can do those things better so they can teach their kids at home, and all of those things these conversations need to be happening at a younger age, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's almost like a generational curse, because past generations, it wasn't really a thing that was talked about, you didn't seek help because that meant you had a problem. So they kind of passed down that. And I feel like we're finally the generation that's wait, this is a problem. There's something wrong. And I'm not blaming, because like you said, parents do what they know. They're not intentionally trying to
hurt
do
their
any
kids.
Damage.
Right.
Exactly.
You're only doing the best you can.
And it's just breaking that cycle of, it's not taboo. This is completely normal. What you're feeling is normal. Let's get it out in the open and deal with it. Because like you said earlier, half the battle is just having someone to confide in, and saying it out loud. And you're like, oh, maybe if I can, because I feel like if you internalize it, it's a bigger demon than it needs to be. But when you say it out loud, you're like, well, maybe it's not that bad, and maybe it's something that I can overcome. Or somebody else could even be like, oh yeah, I went through that exact same thing. But if you internalize it, you don't get that solace. You don't get that moment. Exactly.
Well, and I think that's where...
Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
With anxiety, if you're internalizing that, your anxiety is just having all of these really out there thoughts going through your head. And so if you're just sitting with those alone for years on end, imagine how those are forming your beliefs, the way that you're seeing the world. That's really shaping your whole reality. That's not necessarily in a healthy way. Whereas if I feel like my friend is mad at me and I'm making up all these stories in my head about how they're mad at me, I can just go to the source and ask her, and she's not mad at me. Okay, I don't need to spend the next 20 hours worrying if she's my friend or not anymore.
I went through that with Brennan, actually. Before we got married, I was having horrible anxiety about being a parent for the first time, and the custody situation and everything. And he was kind of my outlet. I had all these wild, crazy ideas about how awful the world was, and I'd say it out loud, and he'd be like, not that he'd be like, you're crazy, but he'd be like, hey, let's like think about this realistically. Like, is this realistically something that's going to happen? And I'd be like, well, no. And I watch this guy on YouTube, and he says a lot, it's borrowed stress. You're borrowing stress from something that isn't really a problem.
Right.
But when you're in your own head, you're not thinking that way. You're thinking,
Right.
this is a very real thing. This is a very real problem. And sometimes you need that other person to be like, you're borrowing this trouble. That's not yours.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to put that on him, but it helped so much to say it out loud and for him to be like, hey, this isn't a realistic problem. You're borrowing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's probably why we're meant to be with somebody, is to have that outlet at home for that, not to take all of that stress as a partner, but to help ease some of that anxiety.
Well, I have a wild imagination too, so I'll like wake up at 2 a.m. and I'll roll over and I'll be like, Brennan, do you think someone's gonna break into the house tonight? Like just crazy things. So, and he'll be like, it's fine, you're fine, you need to breathe. And that's one thing I think is really taken for granted, is just like focusing on your breathing sometimes. It's literally like you're just pushing those thoughts out, and I have started to do that a lot, and it's crazy how much even just that helps. And it's like little things like that people aren't taught. So they don't have like really any outlet. So I think stuff like that is even really important. And that's one thing I learned at therapy.
I think that's part of why, like me and Eli, a big part of our self-care is like lifting and working out. And I think that's why that's such a big factor for us, at least, is because it has that kind of meditative state involved in it, where you kind of tune everything out, you turn everything off, and you just focus on that one thing. One thing that I wanted to touch on was kind of talking about the anxiety and how your mind just kind of runs with itself and it snowballs. Last week we had an episode with Matt Stevens, and he was kind of giving us an idea of where he was at when he was dealing with his mental health issues. And it's funny that you mention it, because he said it almost exactly how you said it, where he gave us an example of where he was making a grilled cheese and he forgot the butter, and that the title of the episode is I Forgot the Butter. The thing is, he forgot the butter, and in his mind, his brain told him that he was worthless. He can't even make a grilled cheese sandwich. What good are you to the world? Yeah. And that's how quick it can happen. You're making a sandwich and your mind goes to a place where you shouldn't be here because you messed up putting mayonnaise on the sandwich or butter on the sandwich. It's not a big drastic thing that's going to happen in your life that causes you to get to that place. It's consistent things that happen. For him, it was a lot of life changes and people coming in and out of his life and that kind of stuff. And it just built up and snowballed into this one moment where he was like, oh crap, I've got an issue with this. And he came to that realization himself, but a lot of people don't, and they kind of let themselves go down that rabbit hole and snowball into a real depressive episode. But that's just how easy it can happen and how quick. He wasn't thinking about anything. It just all of a sudden happened. A switch flipped, and he just felt terrible about himself. And that's why having tools and knowing, recognizing, oh, this is not real, this is not actually happening. This is just the state that I'm in. I need to take steps to get out of that. And if breathing work is what you kind of latch onto, then do that in that moment. And it can help you get out of that state, get out of that mind space, and push through it. And that's the thing, like going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that probably will never go away for him. He has to figure out his triggers and what causes him to get to that point and not go down that road. And when he does happen in those mental states, finding what works for him to get out of that mental state.
Yeah. I think it's like everyone has their own processes of things that work for them and things that they need to figure out how to manage whatever's going on in their life. I think another problem that is just kind of common now is that not a lot of people have good connections with other people. And so we're very connected on social media, but then we're disconnected in real life. And so not a lot of us are having like those face-to-face vulnerable conversations or you know, if you're struggling with all of those thought patterns and all of these crazy thoughts and you're not telling anyone, then you're dealing with that all on your own. And so we're not taking that next step and at least just talking to like a friend about it. Or sometimes people don't even have those outlets to talk to people about things. Like they don't even have that companionship or those people in their lives that they feel like they can turn to, which I think is just exacerbating all of your mental health symptoms if you feel alone and don't have those sources of connection.
I think talking about face to face is really important too, because there was something that I read that like the psychology of talking to someone like over the phone versus face to face is totally different. Because over the phone you can't see that person, you can't feel their energy, you can't get their body language. Where if you're telling someone about your problems or what's going on in your life and you can't see them and know that they're actively engaged, then you think, oh, well, I'm just wasting this person's time. They don't actually care. Where if you're in person with them, you can see their facial expression, their body language, you can feel kind of where they're at and know that they're actively listening to you, and that makes you feel a little bit more of like, oh, they're actually they care, you know.
Right.
And a lot of people take that for granted too, is actually talking to someone face to face.
Do you ever do like sessions over the phone, or do you like to keep it, you know, face to face?
I do mainly like in person, just because I think it is a better benefit for them, and I like it better for myself. But then if I have to do, like, I have a client who is working out of town for like a few months, so we'll do like a Zoom call or like webcam. So I prefer that over doing just phone, because I am missing that whole body language thing, and I feel like you get a lot of signals about how they're feeling just based on the way that they're sitting. Like if they're saying something and they're like slumped over, then I'm like, well, what's going on? Versus if you're like sitting up and saying the same thing, it's totally different type of thing.
I completely agree with that. And that's kind of what I was saying with the body language and in person. With your experience, how long have you been in the mental health field?
So I've been licensed for over 3 years, and then I started my grad program in 2014. So kind of since then.
And do you work for a company, or are you kind of like your own?
I work in a group private practice, so I don't own it, but there's a few therapists that work there. So we see people on like an outpatient basis. So they'll come to our office like once a week or every other week type of thing. And it's just obviously completely voluntary. They're not mandated to come.
Is there, so being a private practice, it's privately funded by the clients you have. Is there any kind of government funding from it?
There would be only like insurance. So if you have insurance, you can so therapists can get paneled on your insurance company, and then they have like a contracted rate that you would pay. And then there's usually with every like county or state, there's local like government agencies that are do either like low cost services or free services. You usually have to qualify with either like income or meeting some sort of qualification, like being like a veteran or something. A lot of therapists in private practice will sometimes do like a sliding scale for people that don't have resources to access. Or there's always options for if you live near like a college town where they have a counseling program. They usually have a clinic on their college campus that will have students that are like in training needing to get hours that are lower cost for people that don't have any access to it.
That's really good, is knowing your resources too, because a lot of people, you know, they don't think about that. They're like, well, I need help, but I don't have the money for it. And that's kind of where it ends for them. Because one, I think people don't want to deal with their issues because then it makes it a bigger problem. Yeah. Like they have to acknowledge that it's a problem.
That they have an issue.
Yeah, and two, it's hard. Like for me, I hate leaving the house. Like I get anxiety just going to the store. So bless you. So the thought of leaving and actively trying to find help, it's scary. It's intimidating. And to have people, you know, like you who are like, hey, here are your resources. You don't necessarily have to come to me, but if you want to sit at home, you can go to this website. Or if you, it's awesome that it's like, there are resources for people who cannot necessarily afford, you know, in just an actual therapy session or something like that. Just knowing your resources is really helpful.
Well, Well, I think that's where a lot of people get stuck too, is it's so overwhelming when you're trying to go figure out how do I even start to, like, I'm already in a mental state where it's not great and I'm trying to find someone to help me. It's so overwhelming. And so like there's like Talkspace is a good one that does online. I think it's fairly cheap per week or whatever. And then you do it all online. So there's lots of resources now. It's just a matter of finding them. And I think that's where a lot of the barriers are, is it's really hard to figure out what can I do for myself that's in my area if you don't know what to look for.
Right. And then also having the courage to do it. Like, it took, not that my family wasn't supportive about it, but they were kind of like, why would you even need therapy? Like, your situation isn't bad. Like, you're just stuck in your own head. And that, to me was just absolutely not helpful.
Right. Then you're like, well, maybe I don't need to look for counseling. I'll just figure it out.
Exactly. And then Brendan was finally like, why are you putting this off? Like, you need to go talk to somebody, because talking to me and your family, it's not helping and your problem isn't going away. So it took kind of that permission to do it. Not that you need permission to do it, but to me, I kind of did. Like, I wasn't allowing myself to do it. And for somebody else to be like, it's not just that you should, but you need to. Like, you need to do it.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that some, not all, but some of what mental health issues are like chemical imbalances in your brain. Like, you're not firing, your neurons aren't firing the right way, where you're producing chemicals that make you feel that certain way. So you're just, you don't feel like other people feel, and that's normal. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It's something where you need to either find medication that works for you, or find your self-care routine or whatever it is that you can do, or talk to someone that helps get those thoughts out so that you have that mental clarity.
Well, how do you go about like determining whether, and I don't know if you do this, but like somebody needs, just somebody to talk to, or if they need like to go further and like
have medication,
be prescribed something, or you know what I mean? Like that difference between, this is something we can deal with, or this is something that you need like more help with.
I think it just depends on their functioning of their life. So if their anxiety is so bad to the point where they can't leave their house, or they can't go do this thing that's like going to impact their life, it really just depends on how much your mental health diagnosis is affecting your quality of life. And so usually I will see them for, a lot of times people are already on medication by the time they come to therapy, because I think sometimes a lot of people's first stop is medication with like their primary care doctor, or then they go see a psychiatrist, and then their psychiatrist is like, hey, you should also go see a counselor. But if they haven't ever seen a psychiatrist, then I will usually work with them for a while and see if it is like, let's just make these behavioral modifications, let's start doing these things. And then if it still is really overwhelming and really to the point where they're not seeing any change, or their quality of life is still really poor, then it's like, well, are you open to medication? Do you want to try it? Because sometimes people are not even open to medication and don't even want to try it. So,
and I wasn't for a long time because of the stigma around it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like people that think it's just going to change their whole life and they don't have to do anything on top of it, or there's people that are just very resistant to it. So you have to kind of feel that out with the client and see where they're at with medication or other things on top of medication.
Right. And I thought that,
You're fine.
I thought that, because they started me on Zoloft, and I thought, this is going to change everything. Like, problem solved. I'm going to feel great. And then I started taking it, and I was like, within the third day, I was like, oh my gosh, I wake up and I don't have that weight on my chest anymore. This medicine's awesome. And then the doctor's like, it takes a few weeks to get into your system. It was just all in my head. And like, I almost needed that like placebo effect to kind of break the cycle. And then I realized, hey, this kind of isn't really doing, a whole lot for me. There's more things that I need to be doing with it. But it was that mindset that I needed, like, this is going to change everything. And, maybe it will, but it's not the only thing that's going to help. Like, it's not going to do it by itself. It's like exercising and not dieting with it.
Point. If you're really down, then it can get you to a point where you can now take the things that you're learning in therapy, or take these skills and actually do them. Like, if it can help you get out of bed because you're so depressed you can't even leave your bed, then you need medication to help you get to like a point where you're can actually start to implement things. And then you may find out later down the road you don't need the medication anymore once you can get to a place where you're healthy.
Right. That's what it did for me. Like, I just needed that cycle break to where I could breathe again. And like, even though I know I'm fairly confident, that was in my head, but it was enough for me to, get out of bed. And then I started going to the gym because I didn't have that, crippling anxiety holding me back.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was like, don't do that. You can't even exercise. Like, you're not in shape enough to get on the treadmill. Like, it broke that cycle. And then I was like, okay, now I'm doing things actively to make myself feel better. So I was able to actually, get off of it, which is awesome because then I don't have to worry about dealing with it.
Going back to what you were saying about behavioral changes, do you ever prescribe a diet or anything for people to help kind of with that behavioral change? Is diet even a thing that you guys talk about with your practice?
I don't, because I know some people are more like nutritional counselors and they will focus more on that. I mean, I think there's like a lot of different things that we can talk about. So if they're very concerned about the things that they're eating or the way that they look in their body image and all of that, then I will talk about that with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't be like, here's what you should eat to help yourself.
Gotcha. Okay.
I feel like that could almost be more damaging sometimes.
Well, it could be.
If you approach somebody, you're like, you need to, I don't know. Because, like, if I went to therapy the first time and he was like, you need to change your diet, I would immediately think, oh, there's something wrong with me. Like, I don't look good and they want me to go on a diet. Yeah.
I was just, my process with mental health is, like, diet and exercise. That, like, what you eat directly impacts how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of research that I've done where, like, your gut is what they call, like, a second brain, where what's going on in your gut stems and it causes different things in your body, different reactions, and can actually cause depression and anxiety in some cases. So that's
diet is kind of...
Well, diet's a damaging term because people associate that with being fat or being unhealthy.
Well, I didn't mean diet in the way like you need to go on a diet. I meant diet as in like your daily routine. You know what I mean? Like nutrition, not
not like you can't eat these calories or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I feel like that's not super helpful at all.
I think like all the things that we use to cope with is really just like an underlying issue. So if we're using food to cope with our not being able to figure out our feelings, then like my route is to get right at the root of the cause. And then if they feel like I want more support around this particular issue with food, then I'll go see like maybe a nutritional counselor or my doctor or someone that's more trained than I am to tell them like what is going to be good for them.
Gotcha.
But that's awesome because a lot of times, somebody doesn't even know where to start.
Yeah.
So if they can make it to somebody like you who's willing to be like, hey, I can't necessarily help with the exact thing you're looking for, but I know somebody who can. Like that alone is such a lifesaver, and they would thank you for the rest of their lives because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten to that place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if that's all that I can do for people, like sometimes people will call in and I can't see them or they're not like within what I work with typically. If I can provide them with like a referral source or the next place to look, then I at least feel good that I haven't just been like, oh, sorry, can't help you. Like better luck next time. Because I do think there is a lot of more difficulty in accessing mental health and getting the right service for what you need. Because I think some people don't want to like turn people away. And I'm like, I don't want to see someone if I feel like I can't help them.
Right. And if you overload yourself too, then that will affect, your mental state at home because then you're overwhelmed and then it would be harder to help somebody else. So taking care of yourself is really important as well.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for, if you're not in a good state, it's really hard to help somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So especially if you have kids, like if I'm not dealing with the stuff I have going on, how am I going to help them, learn how to cope with things in a healthy way?
Right. Because they're just like watching you and picking up on what you're doing.
Right.
Well, I think that's a good place to kind of end the episode. One last thing that I do want to ask is there anything that you're doing to help your mental state, like breathing exercises, anything like that you're doing to kind of keep yourself grounded?
I really like to do my morning routine. So I think having some sort of like routine that you do every day, or I do mine like Monday through Friday typically. And I like to do mine in the morning because I'm just a morning person. But I like to do like some 5 minutes of either just like a guided meditation on YouTube or just silence, like breathing. And then doing a gratitude journal every day is something that's important to me. So I write down what I was grateful for from yesterday and why I was grateful for that. I like to do a lot of like reading, whether that's self-help or just for fun, like before I go to bed at night. So I'm not like looking on social media right before I go to sleep. And doing like telling myself positive affirmations and all of that kind of stuff is kind of what I like to do in the morning to just fill up my cup before I go to work or before I go do other things and I'm having to help other people, because I know that I need to be in a good mental space so that I can help others.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. I think that's something that's important too, is to focus on yourself, to be a little bit selfish.
Yeah.
That's something that Tristan kind of
I struggles
with our
having
kids.
The girls, it's hard.
She puts the girls before herself, and that's I love that, because she's a great mother, but she has to take care of herself first, and that's something that we're working on together to help her focus on herself and do what she has to do. Then she can focus on the girls. So
yeah, then you can just be that much more better for everyone else in your life. You can put yourself first for a few hours a week or whatever.
Well, awesome. We'll go ahead and end it here. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
I think this was a really awesome episode. And we'll have you back on to check in here in a couple months and just catch up with you.
Cool.
We'll if you head to sparocloth.com, save 10% with code podcast10. Leave us a 5-star review and a comment below with the on the iTunes podcast page. Thanks. We'll see you guys in the next one.